Paul Guyer, Critique of Pure Reason. Embark on a journey through the fascinating world of philosophy with A Critique of Pure Reason by Paul Guyer. In this summary, you'll explore the mental materials that make up our understanding of reality, the crucial role of metaphysics, and the dangers of dogmatism and skepticism. Discover the importance of pure reason in avoiding dogmatism and gain a better understanding of how our minds construct reality. Dive into the key components of philosophy, such as space and time, the categories of understanding, and the role of a priori knowledge in mathematics.
Assessing foundations of metaphysics. Imagine being a medieval builder tasked by the king to construct a tower reaching to heaven. You must first examine the materials to determine their strength and suitability for the task. Similarly, philosophers building metaphysical systems must assess the origin and nature of our mind's mental materials. Metaphysics attempts to transcend empirical evidence and grasp the ultimate nature of reality. Many philosophers have tried to build metaphysical systems without first examining the mental materials at hand. It's essential to determine whether these materials are suitable for metaphysics and to understand their limits. If not, we should focus on scientific knowledge while leaving esoteric matters to religion. Knowing the mental materials' capabilities is crucial to avoid constructing an unstable metaphysical tower. Escaping metaphysical dogmatism. To prevent the pitfalls of metaphysical dogmatism, philosophers need to conduct a critique of pure reason. Philosophy demands critical scrutiny of our beliefs, whereas taking our premises for granted is dogmatism, the antithesis of philosophy. Before constructing a metaphysical system, we must examine the validity of the mental materials we're using to avoid dogmatic assumptions. This requires investigating the nature of our knowledge, which may not be derived from our senses but purely from our capacity to reason. In philosophy, building a solid foundation means critically examining the roots and premises of our beliefs. Imagine believing in free will, but only because we think people must have it to be morally responsible. It's essential to dig deeper and ask ourselves why we believe this in order to practice authentic philosophical thinking. By doing so, we take a step away from dogmatism, the archenemy of philosophy, which embraces unquestioned premises. So, when embarking on the construction of a metaphysical system, it's crucial to examine the mental materials that we will use for building. When we assume our materials are fit for the task without investigation, it's essentially dogmatism. To ensure we're not being dogmatic, we must critically explore if our abilities are sufficient for understanding metaphysics and, if so, how this knowledge is acquired. Although our senses give us empirical knowledge about the physical world, they cannot provide us with metaphysical knowledge. This domain surpasses empirical dimensions and relies solely on our capacity for reasoning, which is referred to as pure reason. Therefore, we must examine the potential of pure reason itself. In order to evade dogmatism, it's vital that we critically scrutinize our pure reason capacity. We must determine if it can provide us with profound metaphysical knowledge, and if so, how and to what extent. This process is known as a critique, and to successfully partake in genuine philosophical thinking, we must engage in a critique of pure reason. Overcoming dogmatism and skepticism. Dogmatism, a rigid adherence to a belief or opinion, in the realm of philosophy often leads to another enemy, skepticism, or reluctance to accept or believe anything. In metaphysics, the lack of visible progress as compared to other disciplines leads to constant disagreement and fuels skepticism concerning human knowledge. To pave a way forward and avoid skepticism, it is essential to move past dogmatism and engage in the critique of pure reason, which is our highest faculty of understanding. When it comes to philosophy, dogmatism is considered a significant pitfall. But even an ordinary person may wonder, what's the harm in sticking to particular beliefs about abstract, esoteric subjects? The issue is that dogmatism feeds skepticism, which can negatively impact not just philosophy, but our understanding of human knowledge as a whole. Metaphysics, the branch of philosophy that deals with the fundamental nature of reality, often incite skepticism since there seems to be little progress made across centuries. While empirical sciences have evolved from ancient times to the present, philosophers continue to argue over matters that were debated by Plato and Aristotle thousands of years ago. This historical disagreement can be partially attributed to the lack of a critique of pure reason in philosophy. Philosophers freely advance dogmatic arguments, sparking an ongoing battle of contradictory claims. For instance, while one philosopher might argue for the existence of God as the creator of the universe, another might contend that the universe created itself. Amidst such disagreements, one might be tempted to conclude that metaphysics is unknowable, believing that the discipline relies on pure reason rather than empirical evidence. However, if our highest faculty, pure reason, is incapable of understanding reality's most fundamental aspects, how can we trust our lower faculties to grasp other details? Such doubts may lead us to think that our senses deceive us, ultimately concluding that we cannot know anything for certain. To prevent this general skepticism, it becomes crucial to re-evaluate our approach, steering clear of dogmatism, and embracing a critique of pure reason to explore our understanding of the world. Skepticism's double threat. Living in an era flooded with skepticism, it's vital to remember that both religion and science hinge on metaphysical concepts, meaning skepticism can endanger them both. Religious beliefs often rest on metaphysical realms beyond the scope of the senses. Thus, without reason's aid, these beliefs remain unsupported. On the other hand, scientific knowledge relies on the law of causality, a core aspect that connects cause and effect. However, our notion of causality constitutes a metaphysical concept that cannot be directly observed. Despite this, we assume its crucial role in the universe's structure. So, with skepticism looming large, it's crucial to understand that it can pose a danger to both religion and science. In our contemporary world, rampant with misinformation and skepticism, understanding the roots of skepticism is important. During the 18th century, Kant observed the growing influence of science and the accompanying skepticism towards metaphysics and, by extension, religion. This skepticism threatened both the religious and scientific foundations of society. Religious beliefs are deeply intertwined with metaphysical concepts, such as God and the soul. These notions belong to an immaterial realm that transcends the physical world, rendering them beyond the reach of our senses. No empirical observation can ever reveal these entities or provide evidence for their existence. Without the assistance of reason, religious beliefs remain ungrounded and indefensible. While science may appear to be the most concrete source of knowledge, it too relies heavily on a substantial metaphysical foundation, the law of causality. This principle stipulates that for every event, there exists another event responsible for making it occur. Science's mission is to decipher the causal mechanisms that shape the natural world. Particular laws, such as gravity or the conservation of matter, all assume causality's universality. However, the concept of causality, though essential, is metaphysical and thus remains unobservable. The Scottish philosopher David Hume made a critical observation that influenced Kant. Hume noted that while our senses might detect patterns or sequences of events, they don't necessarily establish a law governing those events. Sensory evidence alone is insufficient for assuming that causality is universally applicable. In a world teeming with skepticism, it's essential to recognize that threatening the foundations of religion and science can have severe consequences. Both fields rely on metaphysical concepts and assumptions that lay the groundwork for an understanding of the universe. Skepticism, by encroaching upon these foundational concepts, endangers not only the stability of our beliefs but also the structure of scientific knowledge. Unraveling a priori knowledge. A priori knowledge is knowledge that is independent of our experience, such as mathematical truths. These truths are considered universally and necessarily true. However, if reason cannot provide us with a priori knowledge, it cannot secure our understanding of mathematics either. With experience only showing examples of one thing tending to follow another and not providing knowledge that one thing must follow another, we can deduce patterns, not laws. Therefore, a priori knowledge must either come from our ability to reason, or it is merely a figment of our imagination and not knowledge at all. The concepts held dear by religion and science, like the idea of God and causality, face a precarious future. A priori knowledge, vital to our understanding of mathematics, is also grappling with uncertainties. Without reason to form a foundation for a priori knowledge, our comprehension of mathematical truths may falter. A priori knowledge means knowing something independently of our experience. Take the equation 7 plus 5 is equal to 12 as an example. Rather than suggesting that 7 plus 5 simply appears to equal 12 or has done so in known cases, this equation audaciously proclaims that 7 plus 5 must equal 12, regardless of the context, whether it's dogs in historic Germany or aliens on futuristic Mars. This essentially means that such an equation is universally and necessarily true. However, our experience cannot provide knowledge that one thing must follow another, it only presents instances of one thing tending to follow another. From this, we recognize patterns, but not absolute laws. Consequently, if our knowledge is both necessarily and universally true, it cannot come from experience. This leaves us with two possibilities: either our knowledge is derived from our ability to reason, making it secure, or it's merely a figment of our imagination, lacking any legitimacy as knowledge. But can reason be the wellspring of a priori knowledge? The answer to this question could determine the future of mathematical understanding, as it grapples with the same uncertainty faced by religion and science. The need to secure our knowledge of mathematics is vital, as a priori knowledge's foundation in reason is put to the test, shaping the future of mathematical comprehensions and the metaphysical concepts that underpin our society. Unraveling a priori knowledge. A priori knowledge differs from innate knowledge, and it emerges through the mind's internal processes rather than experience. As we learn mathematical equations, for example, our knowledge acquires a context through experiences like attending school. However, this doesn't mean knowledge originates causally from experiences. A priori knowledge results from our mind's processing mechanism, independent of our experiences or sense data. Understanding the source of knowledge, whether from sense data, our mind's internal processes, or a combination, is crucial in identifying a priori knowledge. Though we have advanced in our exploration, a summary is in order. Gaining metaphysical knowledge would not rely on empirical knowledge received from experiences, but rather on a priori knowledge derived from reason. So, we are tasked with determining how to acquire such knowledge. Yet, is it logical for a priori knowledge to even exist? The concept seems improbable upon reflection. Does it suggest knowing mathematical equations predate our worldly experience? Are we innately imbued with this information? It is vital to differentiate between a priori knowledge and innate knowledge for proper comprehension of ensuing arguments. A priori knowledge is not innate, it emerges via the mind's inherent mechanisms. Consider the equation 7 plus 5 is equal to 12. Our education instills this mathematical knowledge throughout our formative years. This knowledge comes into being due to experiences like school attendance. We can thus conclude that our experiences precede our knowledge chronologically. Still, chronological precedence doesn't imply that knowledge stems from experience causally. Envision consciousness as the product of forces intersecting from two directions: sense data input from our senses, such as sounds and images, and our mind's internal mechanisms that process this data and create perceptions, concepts, and judgments. Consciousness is the result of their interaction. Investigating a priori knowledge involves determining the origin of the knowledge, from sense data, the mind's internal processes, or a combination of both. If knowledge is purely a product of our mind's inner workings, it would qualify as a priori knowledge, independent of experience, even if chronologically preceded by it. This insight reveals the mind's unique contribution to consciousness. Unraveling the mind's faculties. Our mind's ability to gain knowledge is dependent on three main faculties: sensibility, understanding, and reason. While sensibility deals with sensations and raw data, understanding helps us form concepts and judgments using this data. Reason, on the other hand, is responsible for logical reasoning and creating connections between judgments. The mind, a fascinating entity, can process an astounding amount of knowledge, even without direct experience. To understand how, we must examine the inner workings of the mental machinery. Our minds contain three primary faculties: sensibility, understanding, and reason, each playing a vital role in acquiring knowledge. Sensibility refers to our ability to perceive sensations, such as sound, heat, texture, and more. Picture yourself observing a house, taking in various shades and shapes through your senses. For instance, perceiving the color red depends on the way light interacts with your eyes. However, these simple, isolated sensations by themselves are insufficient. We require something more to make sense of this raw data and convert it into actionable information. That's when the faculty of understanding comes into play. It helps us formulate concepts from the sense data, enabling us to make informed judgments about the world around us. Imagine acquiring experiences of dogs and happiness over time, eventually forming concepts about them. By combining these concepts, you can create judgments asserting logical relationships. For example, if a dog is wagging its tail, it is happy. In this context, the judgment connects the ideas of tail wagging and canine happiness. The final piece of this cognitive puzzle is the faculty of reason. It allows us to link multiple judgments and form logical chains of reasoning, known as syllogisms. Building upon the previous example, consider the following argument: if a dog is wagging its tail, it is happy. This dog is wagging its tail. Therefore, it is happy. In this case, reason enables us to connect two related judgments and reach a logical conclusion. Together, these three faculties, sensibility, understanding, and reason, form the basis of our mind's ability to process information and develop a priori knowledge without direct experience. They allow us to take raw sensory input, extract meaningful insights, and engage in critical thinking, further enhancing our understanding of the world. As we delve deeper into the intricacies of the mind, we uncover a myriad of remarkable ways that our mental machinery operates, making life much more exciting and enlightening. Structuring sense data. The mind plays an active part in comprehending our experiences by converting sense data into meaningful information using predefined ways of structuring. To perceive objects and their spatial relationships, the mind utilizes a pre-existing framework of space, allowing us to understand our surroundings and their organization. Rather than being a passive blank slate, the mind holds the power to actively convert sense data into meaningful information we can comprehend. The key to understanding this concept lies in recognizing that our minds utilize predefined methods of organizing sense data. Our senses provide us with a chaotic assortment of colors, shapes, sounds, smells, and textures, but our minds automatically arrange them into an intelligible structure. To do this, our minds rely on preset templates or procedures to put the data into order. Take, for example, when we observe a house. We see an assortment of colors and shapes corresponding to the various elements such as the roof, windows, and mailbox. Instead of seeing a jumble, we perceive the organization within the scene: the roof above the windows, the mailbox by the door, which indicates the spatial relationships between these objects. The perception of these spatial relationships transforms the sensory content of our experience into a structured form, ascribing order to the chaotic sensory input. If the windows were atop the roof, our mind would perceive a peculiar image, resulting in a distinctly different organization of sensory content. Crucial to grasping these spatial positions and relationships is the underlying concept of space itself. To understand the spatial orientation of objects, above, below, next to, and so on, our minds must first possess a pre-existing framework of space. This shared space framework equips us to perceive any object within it and comprehend the spatial relationship it shares with other objects. Space and time, mind's framework. Space and time are the mind's essential frameworks, organizing our sensory experiences prior to actual encounters. Known as pure forms of sensibility, they exist within us as pre-programmed templates that allow our mind to structure sense data. It is through these frameworks that we perceive sensations simultaneously or sequentially, comprehending spatial and temporal relationships between experiences. In turn, these frameworks enable our understanding of the reality we perceive. Imagine a world where your mind had no concept of space, only possessing the ability to perceive one color patch at a time. You couldn't experience multiple colors simultaneously, lacking the spatial understanding to process and organize them. This inability highlights the importance of space as a primary structure for organizing our sensory experiences, a pure form of sensibility. Space exists within our minds as an innate template, helping to process and make sense of the world around us. Alongside space, time is the other essential pure form of sensibility. This framework enables the mental organization of sensory experiences, establishing the laws that govern the spatial and temporal relationships between the things we perceive. When observing a house, for instance, one might focus on its roof or doorway. These features create a spatial relationship based on their positions in relation to one another. Likewise, temporal connections exist, such as noticing the two features separately or simultaneously. These experiences of time extend to our senses overall, organizing sensations into parallel or sequential moments. The ability to observe and comprehend such relationships is crucial for defining our reality. Imagine a world where time became disordered, people aging in reverse or objects being in multiple places at once. This chaos exemplifies the necessity of a logical temporal framework, ensuring the proper organization of our senses. Time must be accessible to our mind before experiences, paving the way forward to accommodate sensory knowledge. In conclusion, space and time are pure forms of sensibility, serving as foundational aspects of our sensory experience. As pre-existing frameworks, they allow us to process and comprehend reality, shaping our understanding of spatial and temporal relationships. In this capacity, they precede and enable the experiences that define our existence. Mental templates for understanding. Our minds possess built-in templates that facilitate understanding and reasoning about the world. These logical functions and reasoning principles are essential ways the mind connects ideas. Let's take the example of a judgment. If something is left in the sunlight, it will eventually get warm. When we focus on its formal structure, it becomes the logical function, if X, then Y. These basic logical relationships apply to any subject, serving as a mental blueprint. Another example is the disjunctive function, X is either Y or Z, which asserts an either/or possibility. When we use these logical functions, we can create more complex structures like logical syllogisms, such as, an animal is either alive or dead. This animal is not alive. Therefore, it is dead. This follows the pattern, X is either Y or Z, X is not Y. Therefore, it's Z. The mind comes pre-equipped with these templates, as they constitute the starting point for connecting ideas. Without them, the mind wouldn't have any way to start making sense of the world. Unlocking a priori knowledge. The mind utilizes templates, pure forms of sensibility, space and time, and logical functions to acquire a priori knowledge in concepts. By studying these forms and functions, the mind effectively examines its own structure, creating a pathway to knowledge rooted in reason rather than experience. Embarking on the journey to gain a priori knowledge, we dive into the principles of reasoning, logical functions of understanding, and the pure forms of sensibility, space and time. Though there are a total of 12 logical functions and 3 principles of reason identified by Kant, we will focus on the key aspects for our purpose. So, how can the mind acquire a priori knowledge? It is through the templates that enable us to understand both space and time, and concepts derived from these. Analyzing space and time allows us to gain a priori knowledge in fields like mathematics. For instance, geometry's geometric figures, like circles, reveal properties of space when studying them carefully, without relying on experience. Space exists as a form of sensibility in the mind, so by exploring it, we're, in essence, studying our minds and their structuring of experiences, leading to a priori knowledge. Furthermore, the faculty of understanding comes into play with logical functions like the hypothetical judgment, if X, then Y, which embodies the concept of causality. Through contemplating their own logical processes, the mind forms traditional metaphysical concepts, considered the categories of understanding. These 12 categories correspond to the logical functions and encompass concepts like causality, unity, plurality, existence, and possibility. The crucial takeaway here is that these concepts arise from the mind's introspection and attention to its workings. Each of these categories outlines the ways we form judgments and link ideas in our minds, creating pure a priori concepts that do not require experience for their formation. Unraveling categories of understanding. Our conscious experiences are the products of the connections our minds create between sensations and thoughts. The categories of understanding are fundamental ways through which these connections are made, making our experiences possible. However, these categories only reflect our perception of reality, not the true nature of reality itself. Delving deeper into the nature of our experience, conscious experience is not merely an assortment of sensations in time and space. It is the culmination of these sensations combined with the thoughts we have about them. These thoughts involve establishing connections between various sensations and concepts in our minds. For instance, when seeing a round object, your mind links the image of the round object to the concept of a bowling ball. The categories of understanding serve as the foundation for creating such connections. Without these categories, we would be unable to form connections and, consequently, would not have any experience. This leads to a crucial realization: the categories of understanding represent our experience of reality, not reality in its entirety. Consider observing a bowling ball resting on a pillow, creating a depression underneath it. Your mind uses the category of causality to associate these two phenomena in terms of cause and effect. The bowling ball causes the depression. However, it is your mind making this connection. Causality is a construct of your mind, something it inserts into its experience of reality to comprehend the world. Your mind cannot make sense of things unless they're arranged in a particular sequence of cause and effect. This tendency of perceiving causality in everything arises because our minds consistently interpret things in that manner. In truth, our minds must interpret things according to causality. It is one of the fundamental ways our minds understand the world. The necessity for this interpretation explains why causality appears as a law to us. Causality is a law governing how our minds perceive reality. To experience reality, our minds must connect things, integrating them into a unified, coherent experience. Linking things in terms of cause and effect is one of the fundamental ways the mind achieves this. Hence, we can assert with confidence that reality exhibits a law of causality, but only when considering human experience. As for the nature of reality itself, that remains uncertain. The same reasoning applies to all other categories of understanding. Reality beyond perception. One of the most groundbreaking ideas in Western philosophy revolves around our inability to know anything about reality itself, including its existence in space and time. This concept emerges from the fact that our minds interpret sensations through pre-existing frameworks. Our perceptions of dimensions, time, and causality are shaped by these mental frameworks, and without them, our experiences would be fundamentally different. However, this means that we can never truly confirm if these aspects are part of external reality or just our internal experiences, as our only evidence, our sensations, have been tainted by these frameworks. You're in for an unforgettable philosophical revelation. Prepare for a perspective-shifting realization that questions the very fabric of existence. Picture this: what if space, as we know it with its width, height, and depth, is just a perception influenced by our mental framework? Imagine if your mind could transform the three-dimensional reality to have 2, 5, or even 10 dimensions. Your perception would be entirely different. What if you didn't possess any form of spatial sensibility? Then your perception would lack dimensions altogether. This demonstrates that even if external reality exists as three-dimensional space, our minds must apply a specific framework to interpret those dimensions accordingly. If we had an alternate framework, we perceive those dimensions differently. Now consider time, the very foundation of our experiences. To verify if time and space are elements of an external reality or simply products of our inner experiences, we'd need to examine our sensations. However, by the time our sensations reach conscious awareness, they've been processed through mental frameworks of time, space, and our understanding of reality. Thus, our perception of dimensions, time, and causality is inherent in how our minds interpret our sensations. It's like wearing red-tinted sunglasses and claiming the world is red. The fact that our evidence is filtered through our mental frameworks means we can't conclusively determine if these aspects are part of objective reality or solely our subjective experiences. Unveiling reality's true nature. Delving into the complexities of reality, this passage explores the limitations of human understanding when it comes to time, space, and causality. It proposes the idea that our minds might not be able to accurately comprehend the true nature of reality. As a result, we should be cautious when trying to discern the metaphysical nature of existence, focusing on the world we experience rather than attempting to access the unattainable world of noumena. In the quest to understand reality, one must ask, do time, space, and causality truly exist in external reality, or are they merely constructs of the human mind? Analyzing this intricate problem based on Kantian philosophy, one must admit that it remains an enigma. Perhaps our minds accurately depict these concepts, or they could simply exist as the frameworks through which we perceive the world around us. Due to our predisposition to interpreting reality within these frameworks, discerning the true nature of time, space, and causality becomes a formidable task. This acknowledgement of the limitations in human perception has profound implications on the way we approach metaphysics. The main takeaway from this analysis is that reason should not stray into conjecture about the nature of reality in itself. Instead, humans should focus on the world as it is experienced. Our understanding allows us to comprehend and analyze the experienced world using various scientific laws, spatial dimensions, and causal relationships. For example, geometric principles can adequately describe the nature of space, and the laws of motion provide insight into the unfolding of events. However, these frameworks are only applicable to the experienced world, or the world of phenomena, according to Kant. The inherent problem lies in the fact that human understanding is ill-equipped to gain insight into the actual nature of reality, the world of noumena. Our perception of reality is tainted the moment we experience it, as our minds shape the input provided by our senses through the constraints of time, space, and causality. Consequently, discerning the true nature of reality using reason may be beyond our reach. While reason offers a lens through which to examine the physical universe, it remains limited in its capacity to scrutinize the metaphysical nature of reality. If we attempt to extend our understanding into the realm of noumena, our conjectures will remain as mere speculation, unable to attain definitive knowledge of the ultimate nature of reality in itself.
In conclusion, Paul Guyer's A Critique of Pure Reason provides valuable insights into philosophy and our human experience of reality. By understanding the limitations of our minds and the forms of sensibility and understanding that shape our experiences, we can approach metaphysical inquiries with a greater appreciation of their complexity. Furthermore, by embracing the critique of pure reason, we can guard against dogmatism and skepticism, ultimately achieving a more nuanced perspective on the nature of reality. This summary equips readers with thought-provoking concepts and ideas, encouraging further exploration within the realm of philosophy.